Wind found every gap in her coat. Lydia Wren didn't slow down to feel it. 3 days ago she'd had a name people said with respect. Miss Wren. Teacher. Now the wind said her name like it owned it. She gripped a carpet bag that held everything she had left in the world, 2 dresses, a Bible with a cracked spine, 3 unopened letters from a man who'd stopped loving her the day her family lost its land. 26 years old, and she could carry her whole life in one hand. The storm had other plans for her tonight. Snow came sideways now, stinging her cheeks like small needles. Somewhere behind her, Ash Creek was already forgetting she existed. The school board had said the words plainly enough: no money, no term, no position, and by sunset she'd been standing on the street with her landlady crying into a dish towel because kindness didn't keep a roof over anyone's head. She should have found shelter an hour ago. Pride had kept her walking past 3 farms already, telling her she could make it to town. Pride was going to get her killed. Then the gate appeared out of the white. 2 black timber posts, an iron letter C arched between them, and beyond it, a house glowing gold against the storm like something that didn't belong to this kind of night. Lydia had heard of this place from a distance her whole time in Ash Creek. Caldwell land. Cattle, money, glass windows shipped in from the east. And a man everyone described the same way: hard, fair, alone. She stood at the gate long enough for the cold to make the decision for her. By the time she reached the porch, her skirt was frozen stiff at the hem and her hand could barely close around the door knocker. She didn't get the chance to use it. The door opened first. He filled the frame the way certain men fill a room without trying, broad through the shoulders, dark coat hanging open like he'd only meant to check the weather, not answer a knock. His eyes found her face, then her bag, then her boots soaked through to the sole. He didn't say welcome. He didn't say anything for 3 long seconds. Miss Wren. Just her name. It landed harder than any insult could have. I'm sorry to trouble you, Mr. Caldwell. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The storm came faster than I judged. You weren't headed here. No. That wasn't what I asked. She had no answer that wouldn't be a lie, so she gave him the truth instead. I lost my position. I have nowhere else tonight. Something shifted behind his eyes, not warmth exactly, but a kind of recognition, like he'd expected this answer and hated that he had. He stepped back and opened the door wider. Come in before the storm decides for both of us. The warmth of the house hit her like a wall, and for one humiliating second she thought she might weep right there on his clean floor. She didn't. She'd promised herself in Missouri, standing over 2 wooden crosses she'd never be able to visit again, that she would not let the world see her break. The front hall was handsome and strangely hollow, like a house holding its breath. 2 boys stood at the far end of it, the older maybe 8, watching her with a stillness that belonged on a much older face, the younger no more than 5, clutching a wooden horse and grinning at her like she was the best thing the storm had blown in all winter. This is Miss Wren, Reed said. She'll wait out the storm. Are you the teacher? The little one asked. I was. She knelt so she wouldn't tower over him. And who might you be? Ben. He pointed at his brother without looking. That's Jonah. He doesn't like new people. Jonah's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue the point. That's all right, Lydia told him gently. New people can be difficult. Something crossed the older boy's face, too quick to name, too sharp to be nothing. The kitchen was the largest Lydia had ever stood in, and the loneliest. Reed poured coffee into a tin cup and set it in front of her without asking if she wanted it. Roads will be buried by nightfall, he said. Maybe longer. I understand that. Do you? He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching her like a man reading brand marks on cattle. A woman with no post, no wagon, and no kin close by doesn't have many choices in a storm like this one. No, Mr. Caldwell. She doesn't. He didn't flinch from saying it plainly, and somehow that honesty hurt less than a kind lie would have. From the other room, Ben's voice drifted through, asking his brother if teachers knew every book in the world. Reed's face changed when he heard it. Just slightly. Like a door easing open a crack. My boys need more than schooling, he said. They need someone to remind them the world isn't only cattle and fences and things a man buries. He looked back at her. And you need a roof before this town finishes what it started. Lydia's hands went still around the warm cup. I'm asking if you'd consider a marriage arrangement. The wind hit the house with a long, low cry, as if it too needed a moment to take that in. In name and law, he went on, before she could speak. Not romance. Not pretend affection. You'd have your own room, my name, and my word that nothing more is asked unless we both choose it later. My sons would have someone steady. I'd have someone I can trust under this roof while I keep this ranch standing. It was, without question, the strangest proposal ever spoken to her. No flowers. No trembling voice. Just survival, laid flat across a kitchen table like a contract waiting for her signature. She should have stood up. Thanked him for the coffee. Walked back into the snow with whatever dignity she had left. Instead she thought of the 3 coins in her pocket, the room behind the bakery that no longer belonged to her, and a small boy in the hallway who wanted to know if teachers knew everything. Why me? She asked. Because you're educated. Because my sons listened when you spoke to them once, at church, without knowing they were listening. His voice dropped. And because you're desperate enough to hear this offer without pretending the world's kinder than it is. It should have insulted her. It didn't. It was simply true, and true was the only thing solid enough left to stand on. Before she could answer, Jonah appeared in the doorway, eyes moving between them. Is she staying? Reed said nothing. Lydia looked at the boy's guarded face and saw, underneath the suspicion, something that looked dangerously like hope, the kind a child works hard to hide because hoping has cost him before. For tonight, she said softly. Jonah held her gaze a moment longer than he needed to, then nodded once and vanished back down the hall. Reed looked toward the frosted window. You don't have to answer tonight. Morning will come whether we're ready or not. Lydia looked down at her red, cold hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't earned yet, then up at the stranger asking her to step into his broken house. She didn't know if this was mercy or danger or the first step into a life she'd never let herself imagine. But for the first time in 3 days, she wasn't standing alone in the storm. Morning came without color, the world outside buried in a silence so complete it felt like the land itself was listening. Lydia woke in a narrow downstairs room and lay still a moment, letting the ordinary sounds of the house settle over her. A stove lid. Boots on wood. A child's laugh, quick and unguarded. She dressed in her one good gray wool and went to face the man she might marry. He was already up, sleeves rolled, trying to coax a stubborn fire out of green kindling. A cracked egg spread slowly across a plate like it had personally betrayed him. Breakfast, he said, seeing her look. I see that. You're smiling. Trying not to. That's worse. She laughed before she could stop herself, and something in his face eased, just barely, like a man remembering a muscle he hadn't used in years. Over the following hour, in the careful, ordinary language of two people deciding whether to bind their lives together, they spoke of terms. Of Anna, his first wife, dead 3 years now, buried in the ground Ben had never gotten the chance to know. Of the boy's grief, still raw in Jonah, invisible but present in Ben. "I won't ask you to be her," Reed said. "Jonah remembers too much for that. Ben remembers nothing, which is its own kind of grief." "What do you need from me, then?" "Someone living," he said simply. The words found a place in her chest she hadn't known was empty. That evening, after the boys were down, Jonah caught her in the hallway before she reached her room. He held out a small yellow ribbon, faded soft with age. "It was Mama's," he said. "For tomorrow. Not to keep. Just so she knows." Lydia took it like it was something holy. The wedding happened 3 days later, once the roads were passable enough for the preacher to reach them. There were no flowers except the stitched ones on a borrowed lace collar. No music but the fire in the hearth. When Reed saw the yellow ribbon at her throat, something in his controlled face nearly broke. "I've never forgotten," he told Jonah, kneeling before him, voice rough. The boy went into his father's arms like someone finally allowed to stop standing guard. Reed's kiss, when it came, was brief and careful, not romantic, but respectful, like a door being opened rather than forced. Ben ran to her immediately, calling her Mama before the Reverend had even finished speaking. Jonah did not move for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and said, formally, carefully, "Mrs. Caldwell." It was enough. It was a beginning. The weeks that followed softened the house by inches. Curtains stayed open longer. A bowl of apples appeared on the table. Jonah's carving tools found a tin instead of scattering under newspapers. Lydia opened a schoolroom in the old sewing loft, and children began arriving, Salaz's daughter Ruthie, quiet and worried, then others, drawn by word of a teacher who didn't charge what families couldn't pay. Reed began saying her name instead of Mrs. Caldwell, a small thing, dangerous in a way she didn't let herself examine too closely. The town noticed everything. At church, the whispers came fast: married a rich man a week after losing her post, married his land, not the man. Reed's hand tightened around hers in the churchyard, not enough for anyone to see, enough for her to feel. "My late wife's goodness is not a weapon to use against my living one," he told the sharpest of the gossiping women, and something in the way he said "my living one" stayed with Lydia long after they'd driven home through the snow. Then trouble arrived that had nothing to do with gossip. A calf went missing from the north pasture. A fence, cut clean, not chewed or broken by weather. Reed rode out grim-faced and came back grimmer. "Someone's testing whether I'm watching," he said. Lydia thought of railroad rumors she'd overheard at the Mercantile before losing her post. Of men asking careful questions about ranch boundaries. Of Banker Whitcomb's cold, careful smile. That night, a lamp still burning late in his study, Reed marked fence lines on an old map while Lydia stood beside him, closer than either of them planned. "You think like a sheriff," he said. "I think like a teacher who's caught boys hiding broken windows." For the first time all evening, he almost smiled. Then the first gunshot cracked through the dark, and neither of them smiled again for a long while. The shot came from near the barn, and Reed was moving before the sound finished echoing. "Boys upstairs, go," Lydia said, already lighting the hall lamp. Fear wanted darkness. She wouldn't give it any. Jonah met her in the hallway with Ben clinging to his arm, both of them white-faced. "Was that thunder?" Ben whispered. "It was a gun," Jonah said, before Lydia could soften it. She got them down to the kitchen, breathing exercises and all, in through the nose, out slow like cooling soup, while gunfire cracked somewhere beyond the walls and a horse screamed in the dark. When Reed finally burst back through the door, soot on his coat and fury banked behind his eyes, he told them what they'd found tied to the north gate. "Sell before spring, Caldwell, or next time the house burns." Jonah read it before anyone could stop him. His face went the color of the snow outside. By morning, Sheriff Amos Bell had a name to chase: Victor Langley, a man in a black coat with a silver watch, wanted under 2 aliases in 2 territories for exactly this kind of quiet cruelty. Land pressure. Debt manipulation. Fires that always seem to clear ground someone else wanted to buy. "He doesn't work alone," Bell said. "He finds men already afraid, and he uses their fear like rope." Lydia thought of Edwin Harlan's shaking hands the day he dismissed her from the schoolhouse. Of Banker Whitcomb's watchful wife at church, testing her with sweetness sharpened into a blade. The pieces were already there. She just hadn't wanted to see them. She didn't have to wait long to be right. A rider came hard up the road 2 days later, face red from cold and urgency. "The old schoolhouse," he gasped. "Burned clean to the ground." Lydia felt the ground tilt beneath her before he even said the rest, the word someone had painted across the surviving door in black scorch and cruelty. No more teachers at Caldwell Ranch. "They didn't burn the town's building," Reed said quietly, standing beside her in the ash. "They burned yours." Harlan came to them that night, hat crushed and shaking hands, confessing everything in a rush: the debt Whitcomb held over his family, the questions Langley had asked about the ranch's doors and cellars and which room belonged to Mrs. Caldwell. He'd stolen a paper from the bank to prove it. Reed unfolded it on the kitchen table. A crude house plan. Entrances marked. And 4 words at the bottom that turned Lydia's blood to ice water. "Take the teacher alive." Ben's small voice came from the stairs before either adult could hide the paper. "They want to take Mama." Lydia knelt in front of him and made him a different kind of promise, not the impossible one he wanted, but a true one. "I will not give myself to fear. I will fight to come back to you." Jonah, steadier now than his 7 extra years should have allowed, added his own vow to help his brother do as he was told, even if it cost him something to obey. They spent that night preparing the house like soldiers preparing a wall. Reed moved Lydia's bedding out of the room the map had marked, leaving it to look occupied, a trap instead of a target. When the attack came, it came exactly where he'd guessed, and exactly wrong for the men who tried it. Lydia held the pantry line herself when a stranger's hand lifted the cellar trapdoor an inch too far. She didn't hesitate. She fired low, the way Reed had taught her, never at the chest unless there's no other choice, and the man fell back down the steps instead of up through her kitchen. Langley found her anyway, in the chaos, pistol pressed cold against her ribs, smiling like a banker discussing profit. "Drop it, Caldwell, or she drops first." Reed's rifle lowered a fraction. Lydia felt her own pulse slow instead of race, Jonah's promise sitting in her chest like an anchor. "Mama comes back." She let her knees soften as if fainting, and when Langley shifted his grip to catch her, she twisted hard toward the soot-stained sleeve where the barn fire had already burned him raw. Reed moved like the whole house had been waiting for exactly that half-second. It was over almost before it began. Langley on the floor, disarmed. His men surrendering from the cellar and the yard. And Reed's hands shaking as they moved over her face, her arms, checking for wounds that weren't there. "I am not hurt," she told him, and watched the fortress in his face finally, quietly, come apart. "I cannot lose another woman in this house," he said. It was the truest thing he'd ever told her. The weeks that followed brought Ash Creek to its knees and then, slowly, to its senses. Langley's stolen papers implicated Whitcomb directly, a scheme to weaken the valley's ranchers through debt, fear, and fire, clearing land for a railroad spur that hadn't even been officially announced. Whitcomb tried to run with a satchel of evidence and a pistol. It was his own wife who stopped him, stepping into the street and naming everything she knew before he could silence her. "I helped him," Mrs. Whitcomb admitted to Lydia afterward, voice shaking. "Not knowingly. But with talk. With judgment." "You cannot take back words once they become weapons," Lydia said. "So help make new ones." It wasn't forgiveness. It was a start. The town rallied in a way Lydia hadn't dared hope for, wagons of lumber and lace curtains and donated books arriving at the ranch, women who'd once whispered about her now asking whether the schoolroom needed ink. Not everyone changed. But enough did. It was in the ashes of the old schoolhouse that Lydia found the piano key, small, ivory, burned along one edge, and utterly out of place. Reed's face went the color of old snow when she showed him. "That's from Anna's piano," he said. The truth came out slowly, painfully, from Jonah that same evening, how he'd taken the key years ago and kept it hidden in the nursery, how a careless moment at church had let it slip into the wrong hands, how it had traveled from a grieving boy's pocket all the way into the hands of the man who'd used it as one more small cruelty against his father's guarded heart. "I locked the piano away," Reed admitted that night, staring at the key like it might still burn him. "I told myself I was sparing them the pain. I was sparing myself." The next day, for men and a great deal of arguing brought the old upright piano into the front room. Ben pressed a key and declared the whole instrument a broken chicken. Jonah, more careful, found the tiny carved yellow flower on its side and went very still. Reed sat down and played 3 uneven notes of a hymn before the melody caught on a stuck key and died. Nobody laughed. Nobody needed to. "We have the right house for it," he said finally. The last truth arrived with the territorial marshal, on a rain-soft afternoon that should have felt like relief and instead felt like the floor giving way beneath them all over again. An old letter, discovered among Whitcomb's private papers. Written years ago by the doctor who'd come too late to save Anna. Addressed to Whitcomb, who held the doctor's debts, and who had simply never delivered it. Mrs. Caldwell's death was not caused by delay. Removal in her condition would only have killed her sooner. Mr. Caldwell should be told plainly, his decision was not the cause. Reed read it twice. Then he set it down like a man laying down something impossibly heavy. "I did not kill her," he said, and his voice broke on the last word. Jonah reached him first, then Ben, then Lydia, the whole family closing around him in the kitchen while rain washed the windows and years of buried guilt finally found daylight. That night, every lamp in the house was lit. Reed sat at the piano and played the whole hymn through, stuck key and all, and this time he didn't stop at the broken place. There was no broken place left to stop at. The trial came with the spring thaw. Lydia stood before the whole valley in her plain gray dress and Anna's yellow ribbon at her throat, and told the truth as simply as she'd once taught children their letters, without shame, without grandeur, just fact laid out plain enough for anyone to see. When Langley's lawyer tried to suggest she'd married for gain, she looked him dead in the eye. "Yes," she said. "I gained a family. That's exactly why men like your client thought I could be used to break one." The court went quiet. Whitcomb, Langley, and the men beneath them were held for full trial. It wasn't perfect justice. It was justice begun in daylight, and that was enough. The town raised the new schoolhouse before sunset that same day, neighbors who'd once whispered against her now lifting timber beside her husband, laughing when Ben declared spilled nails part of construction. Jonah carved a small sign for the door. Caldwell's schoolroom began here. He handed it to her with his ears bright red, then looked at the yellow ribbon at her throat. "You can be Mama out loud now," he said. "I don't think Mama in heaven has to hold the whole place alone anymore." Lydia opened her arms, and this time he went into them without hesitation, without holding anything in reserve. That evening, on the porch, with yellow flowers just opening at their feet and spring finally, truly arriving, Reed told her plainly what he'd been circling for months. "I love you," he said. No poetry. Just truth, the same way he'd offered her everything else. "I love you too," she answered. "Not because you saved me from the storm. Because you let me build a life inside the shelter." Upstairs, a window creaked open just enough for Ben's sleepy voice to drift down. "Jonah, are they kissing again?" "Probably," Jonah said, and went back to sleep satisfied. Lydia had walked through that gate with nothing but a carpet bag and a storm at her back. She left that memory exactly where it belonged, as the beginning of something, not the whole of it. Because a house isn't saved by timber and glass. It's saved by the people inside choosing, again and again, to stay.